Honorable members, we will be led in the singing of God Save the Queen by Nicole Williams. Honorable members, please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
Honorable members, we do have a number of guests. As you can well see, I hope to be able to get through the introductions in a prompt and reasonable manner. Members, seated in the speakers gallery today is one of the families of our retiring pages, Grace Libka, who's in grade 11. She's a student hoping to pursue a career in medicine. Seated in the gallery, the speakers gallery that is, are her parents, Laura Libka and James Libka, along with her grandparents, some aunts and cousins. I would invite you to all rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. Honorable members, today, as you know, it's a great pleasure of mine to introduce to the Assembly an important part of individuals who play a key role in our democratic process in the province of Alberta. Our constituency staff are often the first point of contact for people and the communities that we serve. Their jobs can be very rewarding, but they can also be very demanding and difficult depending on if you're the MLA for Calgary Currie. It didn't really say that, but I thought I would take the opportunity to encourage my friend, the member for Calgary Currie. They are here participating in the Spring Constituency Employee Learning and Development Seminar, which is developed each year to help them with their unique roles and requirements in their service. The seminar provides them with an opportunity to network with each other, obtain an overview of numerous programs and services available through the Legislative Assembly Office, and over the lunch hour, we had the opportunity to recognize the contributions of these individuals and sincerely thank them for their service to the province of Alberta. I would like to point out specifically two constituency staff who are here celebrating 25 years of frontline service to this province. I would ask Darlene Lynn from Calgary Lougheed and Angela Woolgen-Stravas from Tabor Warner to rise along with the remaining of the 60 constituency office employees to receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. Members, we have a number of other guests in our galleries today that I would like to welcome, but I ask that you hold your applause until the end of the introductions, and I would invite all guests that I introduce to feel free to rise as I introduce you. First off, seated in the galleries today are special guests of the member for Livingston McLeod. Please welcome Jay, Brady, and Brianna Mall. Also joining us today is the cousin of the honourable member for Edmonton McClung, Ron Goebel. We also have 20 guests from the member of Peace River who are attending the March for Life rally today. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce students and staff of Spring Glen Junior High School from the Cardston-Siksika constituency. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as we celebrate National Nursing Week and we take time to stop and show our appreciation for the nurses in our province and in our country, I want to acknowledge that today is a particularly special day as International Nurses Day. The Canadian Nurses Association's theme for this year is We Answer the Call, to showcase the many roles that nurses play in patient health care journeys. Alberta nurses have gone above and beyond, answering the call during the last few years while this government has thrown our healthcare system into chaos with their war on healthcare workers and the mishandling of the pandemic. But nurses kept showing up to take care of us, despite the burnout, despite the exhaustion, despite the workload, despite this government's choices. Even when this government attacked their wages, their unions, even their overtime and paid sick days, nurses kept showing up. I'm in awe of the dedication of Alberta nurses and know that myself and my colleagues will continue to work hard towards a fair deal for some of our hardest working people. United Nurses of Alberta's 30,000 members have made it clear that the UCP government must acknowledge there is a crisis, a shortage of nurses that requires real action, that requires measures to retain the nurses we have now and to recruit and educate new ones. An NDP government would ensure that nurses and healthcare workers have fair wages, paid sick days, mental health supports, and more importantly, nurses and healthcare workers will be able to trust that an NDP government will support them and won't attack their basic working rights. Nurses have been answering the call for over the last 3 years, and I know they're tired of the working environment this government continuously tries to make worse for them. I'm tired of it too. So to all the nurses today and this week, we hear you, we see you, we thank you.
The honourable member for Brooks, Medicine Hat, has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Justin Trudeau is at it again. Yesterday, his Liberals introduced new rules on the sale and transfer of non-restricted firearms. We know that this will do absolutely nothing to reduce gun crime and simply represents another intrusion into the lives of law-abiding citizens. This is nothing more than a backdoor gun registry that they did not campaign on and nobody voted for. A registry that Stephen Harper and the Conservative government proudly abolished. On May 18, the Justin Jagmeet bromance will impose new rules on the sale of otherwise legal firearms and require businesses and individual sellers to wade through countless red tape and needless regulation. Let's be clear. Sufficient rules already exist to govern the sale of non-restricted firearms. They already require a seller to verify that a buyer is legally authorized to own a gun by checking that the recipient has a PAL. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's government has repeatedly called on the federal government to abandon their nonsensical backdoor firearms registry. Justin Trudeau should be focused on implementing stronger border measures to cut off illegal gun smuggling at the source. He should bring back mandatory minimums for offences related to firearms trafficking and crime with a firearm. But what is he doing, Mr. Speaker? He is making criminals out of law-abiding families, hunters, ranchers, sport shooters, and collectors. That's what. Alberta's government will ensure a practical and balanced approach when it comes to firearms ownership that protects our communities from criminals, smugglers, and gangsters while upholding the rights of law-abiding Albertans. Mr. Speaker, Justin Trudeau's rules have been implemented with almost zero consultation of law-abiding firearms owners. I repeat, instead of targeting real offenders like gun smugglers and gangsters, Justin Trudeau will be making criminals out of otherwise upstanding, responsible people. Conservatives and common-sense Albertans know that law-abiding farmers, ranchers, families, hunters, and sport shooters are not the problem. Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government are.
The honourable member for Peace River is next.
Mr. Speaker, ask yourself, how should we in government respond to men, women, and now increasingly children who live in destitute? Do we offer choices that only end in despair or worse? During the pandemic, a Maclean's article reported on an Ontarian woman with multiple non-terminal disabilities who lived on the edge of poverty, frequenting food banks to be fed. Susan's story is one that should make every heart in her chamber sink. Quote, I have no other reason to want to apply for assisted suicide other than I simply cannot afford to keep on living, unquote. Susan was poor, Mr. Speaker, and for that she died. In another CTV article from April this year, we hear from Sophia with a sensitivity and disability. Quote, the government sees me as an expendable trash, as complainer, as a useless pain in the ass, unquote. 8 days later, Sophia died. Her life taken in large part because she was poor and had a sensitivity to cigarette smoke and chemical cleaners. An Ontario man named Chris, with a serious non-terminal disability, also committed suicide. Here his brother is describing his care home. There was urine on the floor. There were spots where there was feces on the floor. If you stood at his bedside, When you went to walk away, your foot literally stuck. When Chris was 35, he took his own life with the help of the government. His brother believes he died because of the squalor in which he lived. Assisted suicide and euthanasia are on the rise in Canada. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has reported Canada has found a net savings of $87 million due to our state-sponsored suicide program before Trudeau's Bill C-7. After that bill, when death need not be reasonably foreseeable, savings increased another $62 million. Parliamentarians are now looking at expanding our suicide program to include mature minors, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the savings will increase. Mr. Speaker, ask yourself again, how should we in government respond to men and women, and increasingly, unfortunately now, children, who live in destitute? Do we offer choices that only end in despair, or worse?
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Edmonton Decore.
It is estimated that there are over 200,000 Albertans living with diabetes right now. One of them is my daughter. She was diagnosed at the age of 6, so I understand the challenges that people with diabetes face. Many of these can be managed with the use of a simple piece of technology, the insulin pump. I've heard from countless diabetic Albertans about how this revolutionary piece of technology has given them their lives back. Students are able to go to school with confidence that they don't need to worry about insulin or needing to take a shot. The insulin pump has become, for many, a fact of life, something that they depend on. So naturally, when this government imposed a change with no warning, no details, no consultation, and no regard for the lives of diabetics and their families, there was great concern. And Albertans have come to expect this from this government. There is no concern for what this might do to them. Our caucus has received messages from all corners of the province scared about this change and what it might mean for them or their loved one. The government isn't interested in getting them answers, though, and in fact, as we learned this week, at least one member of the UCP cabinet thinks the concerns of Albertan is, laugh out loud, funny. Shameful, Mr. Speaker, but this is typical behavior from this government, who's better at picking fights than they are at delivering services. This government went to war with doctors, and it resulted in a healthcare crisis we are seeing in our emergency rooms and communities around Alberta. This government tried to sell parks from underneath Albertans without any warning. This government tried to tear down the eastern slopes in secret. And this government should never have messed with the essential medical supplies that thousands upon thousands of Albertans rely upon to live their lives. Albertans need a government that works for them, not who works against them, who picks fights with them, who tries to hide from them. And Mr. Speaker, the Alberta NDP is ready to be that government.
The honourable member for Calgary-Klein is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sandwiches are beautiful. Sandwiches are fine. I like sandwiches. I eat them all the time. Recently, I had the privilege of taking a tour of Sunshine Community Services. They provide a safe zone for women and their children to escape abusive relationships. And its mission statement says, in part, help women and children transform their lives. Their emphasis on keeping families together during this difficult time is so important, and their intentional inclusion of the broader community in the solution is what will be needed to tackle the challenge of domestic violence. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting with some of the children and singing one of my favorite songs about sandwiches. After seeing one of the suites, their childcare facilities, and meeting with the staff, I came away impressed. Sunshine also offers childcare and community counseling. Mr. Speaker, in March I had the privilege of meeting with representatives of Roots House as well. Roots House is a safe haven for people in the African community needing to escape domestic violence. This organization focuses on educating other civil society groups as well as prevention and intervention. It warms my heart to see various groups working together to make our communities a safer and happier place for everyone, regardless of someone's background. Another great civil society organization I've had the chance to meet with recently is Say Yes Domestic Violence Prevention Society. Its goal is to create a space for connections, creativity, and ideas, regardless of our individual beliefs and ideals. It's about showing up and saying what needs to be said, even when it's uncomfortable. Mr. Speaker, something these not-for-profits I mentioned have in common is the acknowledgement that the answers to these complex issues is found in engaging society to build awareness and mobilize resources, and that only through broader community involvement can we address complicated and challenging issues like domestic violence. We all have a role. I want all civil society organizations to know that you have my constant admiration and support, and I will advocate on your behalf, this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Meadows.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 3 years, I have had the distinct privilege of representing the people of Edmonton Meadows in this assembly. I have the honour of attending the grand opening of Thelma Chalfu School tonight. This school will serve 900 students and was funded and built by the NDP government that put a value in public education and invested to ensure that no matter where in the province you live, quality education would be available. The NDP funded and built hundreds of schools and ensured students and teachers were supported. But sadly, while the NDP government lived up to its commitments to the public education, the UCP has not. The UCP has failed to fund new schools that Edmonton needs, leaving one of the largest boards with no schools despite badly needing them. UCP cuts to education funding means that in Edmonton this year alone, there will be 1,700 public school students who are not funded. The UCP plans have meant that there will be thousands of fewer teachers in classroom since they have taken office. The education minister fired 20,000 Edmonton workers and made the claim that they weren't working. And despite universal opposition, the UCP insisted on forcing its discredited garbage fire of curriculum into classroom. Teachers, principals, school boards, parents, the Francophone communities, and racialized Albertans oppose it. But still, the Premier and the Minister proceed ignoring the feedback they hear. Members of the government even attack teachers by claiming that their input was not needed to develop a good curriculum. As I join my community in celebrating a new school that NDP delivered, I will celebrate part of a team that defends and stands up for public education. Albertans know which party they can trust with protecting public education in Alberta, and it is not the UCP.
The honourable member for Highwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surgical wait times are an extreme concern for all Albertans. I'm sure that all of us can agree the thought of having to wait months for a surgery is chilling. And Alberta has had some of the highest surgical wait times in Canada, which increased every year from 2014 to 2020. And during the past 2 years, these wait times have continued to be a problem, which is worrisome for so many Albertans. But unlike the opposition across the aisle, this government has been committed to making changes that will actually reduce these wait times. The Alberta Surgical Wait Time Initiative is a plan to lower wait times so that all Albertans receive surgeries within clinically appropriate timelines. And to do this, we are investing $133 million over 3 years to upgrade and expand surgical operating rooms. As Alberta has done since the 1990s, we're going to continue to work with chartered surgical facilities to increase access to these much-needed surgeries. And so far, Mr. Speaker, this has been working. For cataracts, we expanded our capacity by working with chartered surgical facilities to provide 10,000 cataract surgeries in Edmonton, and in Calgary, we will have 15,000. By utilizing these clinics, we are reducing wait times and making sure that Albertans get the care they deserve. In the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, we had an average wait time of 10 weeks for cataract surgeries, the shortest it's been since 2015. So, Mr. Speaker, don't let the NDP fool you. They keep claiming their #1 priority is Albertans. But when they were in power, wait times for the same procedures were extremely high at 17 weeks. Let's face it, their union friends would have never allowed them to find solutions that actually work for Albertans, because they only find solutions that work for their union bosses. So I'm proud to be a part of a government that is taking real action to ensure Albertans get the surgeries they need when they need it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, if I could beg the indulgence of the Assembly for just one brief moment. I just realized and noticed that former member Scott Sear and his mother have joined us in the gallery today, and I neglected to introduce them, but I hope that you'll rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the honourable member for Edmonton Glenora has question 1.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans facing sky-high natural gas bills are waiting for help from this Premier. Waiting and waiting and waiting. The Premier announced this rebate for Albertans on February 1st. It's been 100 days, and Albertans still have no idea when it will arrive. Mr. Speaker, Albertans don't want spin, they don't want UCP rhetoric, they don't want excuses, they want a check, and they want to know when it's coming. So will the Premier rise in this House today and tell Albertans what date the rebate is finally coming?
The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, thankfully, despite NDP obstruction and delays, we got the legislation passed. It is now law, and the minister is working with the utility companies, some 40 electricity retailers, to get that rebate onto people's bills as soon as possible. We hope in the weeks to come, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear about this. The NDP tried to stop that bill. They refused to allow us to fast-track it. And the real issue is they are cheering on Justin Trudeau's effort to quadruple the carbon tax to make life even more expensive for Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans have gotten no answer from this government for 100 days and counting. A recent survey shows half of Alberta households are just $200 away from not being able to make ends meet. Instead of rushing to help, the UCP are ragging the puck on these rebates. In April, Premier suggested that he would speed it up and get these to families sooner than the fall. But he must have changed his mind because the regulations still say October. So why did the Premier flip-flop? Why is he so slow?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's government has taken unprecedented action to help Albertans cope with the rising cost of living, a cost of living that is rising in large part because of the NDP Liberal carbon tax grab. But, Mr. Speaker, through our immediate April the 1st pause of the Alberta fuel tax, that represents a $1.3 billion annual savings. The electricity rebate plus the forthcoming natural gas cap, all of that together represents $2 billion of consumer relief, more than any other government by a country mile.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, when the insurance lobby wants to jack up their fees, the Premier says no problem, and he rushes to make it happen. In fact, it took the Premier only 2 days to put $4.7 billion into the bank accounts of large, profitable corporations. 2 days. But Albertans, they get 100 days of excuses when it comes to their bank accounts. Is the Premier beginning to understand why Albertans can't trust him?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, do you hear the sound of socialism from the other side? Oh, a tax cut, they characterize as putting money into someone's bank account when what we're doing is not taking it away from them, Mr. Speaker. They crushed employers, job creators, and Albertans with a huge increase in the business tax rate, in the personal income tax rate, with their carbon tax hike. They drove us into 4 years of an economic tailspin from which we are only now recovering, Mr. Speaker, as we lead Canada in economic growth and job creation.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Glenora for the second set of questions.
Mr. Speaker, every day it becomes more clear that Albertans cannot trust the UCP with public education. Just look at the confusion among the Cabinet when it comes to Bill 21. The Associate Minister responsible for the bill and the Education Minister can't even agree on what the bill does. So will the Premier, the guy who's ultimately responsible, tell Albertans why his Minister for Red Tape thinks that private schools should be allowed to charge whatever they want for tuition and not even tell the Alberta public?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. The items that are in the red tape reduction bill, that is Bill 21, really just simplifies the process. The information is going to be provided to us, has always been provided to us through the audited financial statements. The member opposite is just trying to confuse the public, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Glenora.
I'm just telling the minister what her colleague, the other minister, told everybody in Alberta. The Education Minister, I guess, says that the Associate Minister for Red Tape is wrong. Mr. Speaker, because public education and private education are all funded by the taxpayers of Alberta, we will be proposing an amendment to ensure that the UCP can't hide how much money private schools are charging. The minister says they'll still have to tell her. They should have to tell the public. So, will the Premier take a stand for transparency and accountability for once and promise Albertans that this information will be disclosed?
The Honourable the Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. As the minister just did, of course, this information is available through the audited financial statements. But the real reason the NDP is upset, Mr. Speaker, is because they hate Alberta's tradition of school choice. They believe that bureaucrats and politicians should make decisions about kids' education rather than parents and families. We fundamentally disagree. The NDP voted against the Choice in Education Act that recognized for the first time in Canadian law that parents have a human right to decide how best to educate their kids.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, every child in Alberta deserves a high-quality education, reasonable class sizes, and a quality curriculum. This is important because right now the UCP is cutting public education, hiking school fees, and forcing a backwards curriculum on Alberta students. At the same time, they want to hide how much taxpayers are forced to subsidize some wealthy private schools, some who are already flush with cash. So will the Premier stand up to the red tape minister and admit that Alberta taxpayers have a right to know how much schools are charging in tuition?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite shows that she does not understand independent schools. They only get 70% funding. They get 0% for capital. And, Mr. Speaker, while they have over 6% of the population, they only get 4% of the funding. So, in fact, the average taxpayer is saving money because students are in independent schools.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, only moments ago we heard the Health Minister announce the UCP will be suspending their changes to the insulin pump therapy program. This comes after days of the UCP ignoring the voices of Albertans who spoke out against this policy. We stood with Albertans like 6-year-old Connor who were worried about losing the pump that allows him to go safely to school without worrying about his diabetes. Albertans like Connor deserve an apology for the chaos and fear this government created. Will the Premier offer a full, unreserved apology to the thousands of Albertans with diabetes like 6-year-old Connor who were belittled and ignored by his government?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to the media earlier today, we are doing a pause on our program, and I want to apologize for Albertans due to the confusion, because there are a lot of questions that we actually hadn't answered yet. So we're stopping the program, the changes to the program right now. We're going to reach out to Albertans and do a series of town halls and reach out to all individuals involved in the insulin program. There's 4,000, because, Mr. Speaker, we're going to make sure no one is going to be left behind. The intent behind this was to be able to expand access, and we're going to make sure that we're going to live up to the intent.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for the apology. You know, Mr. Speaker, this government clearly did not consult as they plowed ahead with this plan that would seriously impact the lives of diabetics. It does not seem that a single diabetic was consulted, not a single organization. This government tried to move fast, and they got caught when Albertans got furious. Now they need to do better. Now, while this policy is suspended, Albertans are understandably wary and want to be sure the government's not going to try to do the same thing again. So will the minister lay out today the details of what consultations he's going to hold? Will he commit that this policy won't move forward until every concern from the community is addressed?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we did do consultations beforehand. There was a clinical advisory committee in regards to the insulin pump program, but evidently, Mr. Speaker, given the concerns that we've raised by some of my caucus colleagues, by the members across the aisle, and I heard directly from Albertans who rely on the program themselves, we didn't do enough. So again, I like to apologize for that. So we actually are going to be reaching out. We're going to be holding a town hall. We're going to be reaching out to each and every individual person on the program to understand what the impact this has on them, and then again, we'll make changes as necessary to ensure that no one gets left behind.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the minister said that they had details they hadn't released yet. I can't understand why this government keeps creating chaos in our healthcare system since they took office, with these lines outside of children's hospitals, thousands in southern Alberta with no family doctor. This simply does not help. But Diabetes Canada also had put out a letter today calling on the minister, noting that this program could put people in the position of having to choose between an insulin pump, rent, or food. So to the minister, will he commit that his rewrite of this program will not put a single person in a position where they are unable to afford an insulin pump?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, yes. We are going to ensure that we can protect those who need this, because there shouldn't be a choice between being able to manage this chronic disease and then putting food on the table. So, Mr. Speaker, we are going to ensure as we work through this policy program and the changes to understand where people have already on, because Mr. Speaker, the vast majority already are in plans that actually can cover some of this, but there are some who are not. We need to identify those and make sure that no one is left behind. And Mr. Speaker, I did speak with Diabetes Canada earlier today to be involved in the ongoing consultation, and I invited them, and I'm looking forward.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverview.
The City of Edmonton expects the number of people sleeping outside without support will continue to increase. Currently, there's an estimated 800 people sleeping outside on any given night. This number will skyrocket once the pandemic emergency shelters close at the end of this month. The Premier has cut housing supports by more than 15% and callously forced more Albertans onto the streets. To the Premier, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. There are more people facing homelessness because of this crisis. Why is the UCP cutting critical housing supports when so many Albertans have nowhere to go?
Good question.
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Of course, this government is committed to a recovery-oriented system of care to help all Albertans and work with multiple ministries. So Alberta government is maintaining funding for homeless shelters, nearly $49 million, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that those who require emergency shelter have a safe place to stay, Mr. Speaker. We provide nearly $90 million to community-based organizations in Alberta, 7 major cities to fund a range of supports, including supportive housing, intensive care management, and rapid rehousing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to that recovery-oriented system of care and helping Albertans.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverview.
This Premier failed to help Alberta's most vulnerable. As a result, the City of Edmonton is forced to spend $860,000 to hire 7 more park rangers, 14 more cleanup crew, and 9 more housing and outreach workers to address the anticipated surge in homeless camps due to the emergency shelter bed closures. This is not a solution. Tearing down their tent and breaking up an encampment doesn't create a bed for them to sleep in. Does the Premier understand that forcing the City of Edmonton to clear out the homeless encampments from around the Sky Palace is not feasible housing strategy?
Just one second. The Honourable Associate Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, housing is an integral part of the recovery-oriented system of care. Ensuring that people have access to housing is extremely important, but also ensuring that people have access to mental health and addiction support, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've created the 8,000 spaces. 8,000 people are getting help that didn't get help under the previous government, Mr. Speaker. That is so important to understand, Mr. Speaker, and we're committing to helping people who are vulnerable on the streets of Edmonton.
Honourable member for Edmonton Riverview.
Addressing homelessness is not only a social issue, but an economic one. Chambers of Commerce are calling the UCP to take action. When addressing the Edmonton Chamber, Mayor Sohi stated, "Edmontons deserve a fair deal. Please work with us. Please stop holding Edmonton's economy back." Instead of working with the City of Edmonton, the Premier ignored their funding requests for permanent supportive housing and left hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government on the table. To the Premier, economic recovery needs to be for everyone. Will he commit to here and now to work with the City of Edmonton to prevent the surge of homeless camps?
The Honourable the Associate Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member for the question, but over COVID, this government has committed to over $100 million during that particular time. Mr. Speaker, shelters, especially in Edmonton, are at 52%. This government is committed, again, to helping people with mental health and addictions problems. We're committing to helping the most vulnerable, and I am proud of the work that our Premier has done. I am proud of the work that the Minister of Social Services has done and that he continues to do.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Cross is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Technology and innovation continue to be a key focus in Alberta as the sector gains momentum and expands in record numbers. Recently, we heard about Calgary-based Neo Financial, who raised $185 million in their most recent fundraising round and are now part of the $1 billion valuation club. But we know it's not just companies in the big cities who are developing innovation to help solve provincial, national, and international problems. To the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, What supports are available for tech companies and startups outside of Edmonton and Calgary?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's economy is firing on all cylinders. Our unemployment rate is at 5.9%, a level we haven't seen in this province since 2015, Mr. Speaker. That being said, we can't stop there, Mr. Speaker. We're going to support entrepreneurs around the province, corner to corner, Mr. Speaker. Our regional innovation networks, in partnership with Alberta Innovates, are going to be there as a pipeline of mentorship, Mr. Speaker, to help innovators take their ideas and make sure that they can have the tangible supports they need to turn into a business plan and commercialize those opportunities.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the importance of supporting Alberta's tech sector throughout the province in all industries, from agriculture to healthcare and everything in between, and given that there have been numerous investments made by this government through Alberta Innovates to support innovators and entrepreneurs through regional innovation networks, to the Minister, what services do these networks provide, and how can Albertans benefit from them?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, right now in Alberta, we're seeing a tech renaissance that's happening. Just a few years ago, we only had 1,200 tech companies. Now we have over 3,000 tech companies in this province, Mr. Speaker, and the amount of capital that they're raising is growing exponentially. We've broken our record each of the last 3 years. Now we're going to support entrepreneurs in every corner of this province, but making sure we're there at the early stage, mid-stage, and later stage of their mentorship, because these companies can grow from a handful of employees one day to making sure that they're a billion-dollar company with 500 plus employees to 1,000 employees, Mr. Speaker. That's the support that we're going to be there. We're going to have a bright future in this province and a more diversified economy.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. Given that growth that we are seeing in Alberta's tech and innovation sector, especially in our big cities, but also growing in communities thanks to our investments like the one just spoken about, and given the need to find more talent to fill a growing number of these tech positions, can the Minister tell us what work is being done to develop and attract more individuals to fill these roles?
The Honourable the Minister.
Mr. Speaker, do you remember those years, Mr. Speaker, under the NDP, Mr. Speaker? Do you remember those years when Albertans fled and their energy minister told Albertans to go to another province to get a job? Mr. Speaker, it's bright times in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing migration of thousands and thousands of Canadians moving to Alberta for high-paying jobs and an affordable way of life, Mr. Speaker. The NDP are heckling, Mr. Speaker, because they don't like that, Mr. Speaker. They don't like the fact that Alberta is back, Mr. Speaker, and stronger than ever.
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
The Alberta Council of Disability Services launched a campaign called The Perfect Storm. Disability workers are the people that support developmentally disabled Albertans to live in their communities and take advantage of inclusive employment. Alberta's disability workers are chronically underpaid. With inflation at a 30-year high, the average hourly wage at $18.76 an hour, disability workers are leaving the sector in droves or having to get multiple jobs to feed their families. There is a documented crisis in this sector right now. They need an increase to their wages. Will the Minister of Finance deliver this increase?
Yeah. The Honourable the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question, and certainly on behalf of the Minister of Social Services. Alberta's government values the dedication that disability service workers have and have shown throughout the pandemic in caring for the most vulnerable Albertans, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Community and Social Services expanded the critical work benefit to all community and disabled service workers, funding through the family support for children with disabilities and the persons with developmental disabilities, Mr. Speaker. So to date, we have distributed over $16 million, Mr. Speaker, and over 13,000 workers.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Given the majority of responding community disability organizations are reporting increased costs related to insurance, utilities, employee benefits, IT, accounting, auditing, fees, staff training and recruitment, maintenance, property tax, rent, and more, and given 61% of reporting organizations are facing these financial pressures, and given the increasing financial pressure on these organizations may result in the rationing of supports or increased costs for disabled Albertans. Does the Premier prefer that disabled Albertans face even higher costs or fewer services? Will he respond to the crisis or let someone just spew written notes?
Yeah. The Honourable the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The Ministry is working with the disability services sector and partnering ministries, of course, Mr. Speaker, to improve attraction and retention within the sector. We've provided a grant to Alberta Council of Disability Services to collect and analyze data Mr. Speaker, the ministry is committing to helping people in this section. Thank you.
Order. The honourable member for St. Albert.
Given this side needs way better notes, and given the Alberta Council of Disability Service has unequivocally stated that Alberta's community disability service sector is in an untenable situation right now as a result of consecutive years of stagnant funding, soaring inflation, and extreme pandemic pressure. Given community disability workers are leaving the sector due to fatigue or the inability to support themselves and their families.
Order. The honourable member for St. Albert has the opportunity to ask the question without conversations happening on around her. You can go back just a couple of seconds if you want. You have about 10 seconds remaining.
Given that I'm incredibly disappointed that this government is unable to put someone up that actually has some information to offer the community disability sector, will the Premier or Finance Minister answer the question that these service providers are asking?
Yeah. The Honourable, the Associate Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. You know, it's a little richer from the NDP to especially talk about notes when they're fact reading notes. I will ensure that the member from the Ministry of Social Services is certainly aware of this issue. He is working very hard to rectify any of the issues within this department. I'm proud of the work that he's doing and that he's going to continue to do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, EMS is in crisis in this province and the government is not listening to workers. Last month, we sat down with Canmore-based advanced care paramedic Kristen Buck, who said the town has gone from having to shut down an ambulance 3 times in 2019 to 32 times in 2021. There were 133 Albertans who saw a delayed response within the town of Canmore last year, and yesterday when asked about these issues, the acting minister claimed this was all normal. To the minister, does 32 ambulance shutdowns in one Alberta town sound normal to him?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue. Our system, our healthcare system, is facing pressures, including our EMS system. Mr. Speaker, this problem has come to light. There's an increase of 30% of calls, but Mr. Speaker, we are taking action to address this. We have, in Budget 2022, we put in an additional $64 million, Mr. Speaker. That's to add new ambulances, to hire new staff. Mr. Speaker, AHS announced a 10-point plan to address some of these issues. Mr. Speaker, we recognize as an issue. We are solving it.
Sure. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, paramedics and first responders are telling us clearly this is not normal. And given Kristen had to file a Freedom of Information request to get the real facts instead of government spin, and given what she found was response times are climbing with more responses over 20 minutes, and given that in March a patient with a heart condition waited 33 minutes for an ambulance, why doesn't the minister stop the excuses, look at the data, listen to Kristen, and take immediate action?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we are taking action. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, I was pleased to tour the new Integrated Operating Center in Calgary. This center, the purpose of this is to be able to smooth out the calls and to direct paramedics to different hospitals within Calgary and surrounding area. Mr. Speaker, I know this is just one of multiple actions that we need to do to address this issue. A big part of it is hiring more paramedics, Mr. Speaker. We are doing that. We have actually hired several hundred, and we're actually going to hire more. Mr. Speaker, we understand it's an issue, and we are going to direct it.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, it used to be that Canmore EMS responded to most of their calls inside of Canmore, their own community. But given last year, Canmore EMS responded to more calls outside of Canmore than inside of it, and by not addressing pressures in Calgary, this government is causing stress and suffering in every single community around it. And given this week, I talked to a Canmore firefighter who said when they're first on the scene, they now have to ask from which community is the ambulance coming so they know how long they'll be waiting. Will the minister listen to frontline workers, offer casuals full-time contracts as frontline workers have asked for? We clearly need them. What is the holdup?
The Honourable the Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are listening to frontline workers. Mr. Speaker, we are adding resources and adding more people. We understand that there is an issue. Mr. Speaker, that is the reason why we appointed an advisory committee. My colleagues, in this chamber are actually leading the charge in terms of doing that. They have reached out to do surveys of frontline workers as part of that. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from their report, which will be coming in the next couple of weeks. We've also asked for some quick hits that we can address these issues, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking forward to be able to make an announcement of that in the next coming days. We understand there's an issue. We are addressing them.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the pandemic, understandably, the focus of our healthcare, doctors, nurses, and specialists, was on the pandemic response and those in critical care. Resources were focused and the most urgent issues were prioritized. The pandemic highlighted critical system issues and put strain on healthcare and health workers right across the province. Rural areas in particular continue facing a shortage of physicians, which has left rural Albertans in a vulnerable position. To the Minister of Health, what's being done to attract nurses, doctors, and specialists to rural areas, and what's the plan to ensure they remain working in these areas rather than relocating, leaving these communities short once again?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, staffing outside the two major cities has been an issue for a number of decades, and we've been through a global health crisis that has strained healthcare in every province. Mr. Speaker, we've continued to add doctors, nurses, and paramedics, and other healthcare professionals in spite of the pandemic. And Mr. Speaker, we are going to do more. Budget 2022 maintains the most generous incentives for rural doctors in Canada and funds new initiatives to attract doctors and nurses to smaller communities. We know there's added strain in smaller communities, and we're addressing it as we add capacity right across our healthcare system.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Minister for that answer. Given that a shortage of doctors and nurses has both immediate and long-term effects on families and communities, and staff shortages can snowball, exacerbating the problem further, and given that hospitals in many rural areas are currently understaffed, adding additional pressure on those doctors and nurses that choose to remain to carry that additional load. To the same Minister, what strategies are being implemented to ensure the retention of new hires, and how will unexpected staff vacancies be avoided in the future? For example, will there be sufficient flex capacity to bridge vacancies without further service reduction to rural Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to the Honourable Member for these important questions. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 includes $90 million for rural physician recruitment and retention. It also includes two new initiatives, Mr. Speaker. The Reside program will support 60 new doctors in rural or remote communities, and the new Rural Capacity Investment Fund will provide $15 million for rural nurses and another $7.5 million for relocation assistance. Mr. Speaker, we know we need to do more. We're working with the AMA and with the Rural Practitioners Program to do an assessment of our programs to help them make them more effective, and working with my colleague in advanced education to be able to train more healthcare.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again through you to the Minister. Given that the issue of service in rural communities is not unique to Alberta, with more than 20% of the Canadian population residing in rural areas, but only 9.3% of physicians practicing in these same areas, and further given that rural communities experience the largest deficit of healthcare workers consistently, and that this is a decades-old problem, again to the Minister of Health, what strategies are being enacted to guarantee improved health care for those living in rural areas, and what's the plan to stabilize the flux of physician supply in these areas, including in the rural hubs like my community of Grand Prairie?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Honourable Member mentioned, that this is an issue not only we face in Alberta and rural areas, but across the entire country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we were fortunate to see a net gain of 99 physicians in the first quarter of this year compared to last year. But we understand, Mr. Speaker, that those gains are not where we necessarily need all the doctors, because we know in smaller communities they had losses, and the pandemic has been hard on family physician practices, especially in those communities. Mr. Speaker, we are working with the MA to address the pressure on family doctors as part of the work as we work towards a new agreement, and we'll continue to focus on solving this problem in rural Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Boular-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, next month marks 2-year anniversary since the devastating hailstorm hit northeast Calgary, and as I drive through my community, I still see houses with hail damage. The UCP government has done nothing to help these people. The Premier once promised to call his friends in the insurance industry, but those calls appear to have been ignored. Thankfully, the city has stepped up with supports to help Calgarians replace their roofs with stronger ones that can resist future hailstorms. Why has the UCP refused to provide similar support to the people in northeast Calgary?
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will acknowledge that the Honourable Member did go and pose for a picture along with the Leader of the Opposition. Congratulations on that. But while they were posing for that picture, members of ours from Northeast Calgary went and have been working with people who had hail damage. working to make sure that the insurance claims that they had were honored. We're pushing the insurance companies to honor those claims, Mr. Speaker. That is actually more than the NDP did when there was hailstorms when they were in government. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to faithfully work with people that suffer damage through disasters.
The honourable member for Calgary, Bill Armacall.
Given that the city has recently ended the Hail Resilient Roofing Rebate Program, and given that the program was oversubscribed and ran out of money due to its high demand, and given that it would cost $5 million to process the remaining applicants, not the made-up $2.5 billion figure the UCP keeps citing, and given that this is just 1/6 of the annual budget of the War Room, will the government step up and help the people of Northeast Calgary, or they will continue to fund their shameful War Room?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the NDP has just revealed the way they look at the world. They say they have a disaster recovery program that is designed to look after uninsured losses, which is what the design is. What the NDP wants to do is pay for everybody's loss in Alberta that hasn't bought insurance. Billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker, untold. And you know what? They haven't even put any thought into the extension of what they're asking for. But putting the government on the hook to pay for every uninsured loss, roofs, homes, automobiles. Mr. Speaker, they just don't have an idea what they're asking for.
The honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, given the minister last week announced $744 million in flood mitigation for Calgary and refuses to fund $5 million for hail resistance roof in Northeast Calgary, why is the double standard? Why are people in Northeast Calgary treated differently, Minister?
The honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the NDP doesn't understand is there is no double standard. Disaster recovery program is for uninsured losses. The NDP is suggesting that nobody buys insurance and the government replaces every single thing for every single Alberta that's ever lost.
Order. The honourable member for Calgary, Bill McCall, had your opportunity to ask your question. Now I'd like to hear the answer.
No, I appreciate the honourable member that's asking the question posed for a picture once, and he wants to be thanked for that. But, Mr. Speaker, instead, he's actually suggesting that we put insurance companies out of business and that the government pay for every single loss that everybody has, no matter what.
The order. The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, skyrocketing utility prices are crippling Alberta's rural economy. It's having a detrimental effect on families, businesses, and nonprofits. I'm hearing from people across the province who can't afford their monthly bills. Our economy is still recovering from the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The rural Albertans I'm hearing from say their bills are hundreds of dollars higher now than they were under the NDP government. Will the Associate Minister of Electricity rise in this House and tell rural Albertans specifically what he's going to do to address this crisis today? No more talking points. Let's have some action, Minister.
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to invite any of the members of the NDP to come and experience rural Alberta at any time. Mr. Speaker, in fact, the Sundry Stampede Rodeo is about to happen at the end of the month, and I hope they all come and see what rural Alberta is really about, Mr. Speaker. But the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity and this government are working tirelessly, Mr. Speaker, to help with bills and to fix the boondoggle that the NDP made with our electricity system and our heating system in this province, Mr. Speaker. We have rebates coming for both electricity and natural gas, Mr. Speaker, and we have fought against Justin Trudeau's carbon tax that they supported.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, given, Mr. Speaker, utility costs were lower when we were in charge, and we took action to ensure they never hammered household budgets the way they are right now. Given the devastating effects of these utility costs have led some rural municipalities to call on the Alberta Utilities Commission to launch an investigation. And given that we support any inquiry into why costs are so high, does the minister support the calls from the mayors of Taber, Fox Creek, and other municipalities, and will he join them in supporting an investigation into these skyrocketing costs?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I love that the NDP talked about when they were in government. When they took government, electricity cost 3 cents. After they were done, they capped it at 6.8, almost triple. Why did it triple? They cut off the cheapest source of electricity. They added a carbon tax. They supported the federal Mr. Speaker, these folks across, actually a stated objective is to have everybody taking the bus because they wouldn't be able to drive. That's actually their goal in the carbon tax, and now they're complaining about the cost. They've actually succeeded in making it unaffordable.
The honourable member.
Well, given this government continues to do nothing, and again, municipal leaders are asking for an inquiry, and given that the Premier promised a natural gas rebate 100 days ago, and we still don't know where that is, and given that the minister himself represents a rural riding of Morinville-St. Albert, has the minister forgotten the people who put him in that chair? Does he even care? Explain to the voters in the constituency of Morinville-St. Albert why this government is doing nothing.
The honourable government house leader.
Mr. Speaker, there was an inquiry into what happened with electricity done by this government as part of our platform, Mr. Speaker, that came back and said that the NDP broke the entire system, did Albertans an extraordinary disservice, Mr. Speaker, and made electricity prices skyrocket, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, they have inside this House filibustered and tried to block natural gas rebates, Mr. Speaker. Shameful. They've stood with Justin Trudeau and their boss, Mr. Singh in Ottawa, forcing a carbon tax on Albertans over and over, Mr. Speaker, and have defended Justin Trudeau trying to steal Albertans' birthright, Mr. Speaker, which we will not let happen.
The honourable member for Calgary-Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of this government's work to fight racism and thankful that this government has taken concrete steps to stand up to racism. For example, the discriminatory practice of carding was banned by this government, and we created the Hate Crimes Task Force, as well as the Associate Ministry of Immigration and Multiculturalism, to act as an advocate for Alberta's minority communities. To the Associate Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism, can you update this House about what this government's initiatives are to make our province a more welcoming place for everyone?
The Honourable the Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question, and also recognizing some of our government's work to combat racism in this province. In addition to banning the horrible practice of carding and establishing the hate crime unit and community liaison, we have more than doubled the funding to protect places of worship and multicultural places through the Alberta Security Infrastructure Program. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, that program is very welcomed by the communities. And Mr. Speaker, I continue to do my outreach.
The honourable member for Calgary-Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to that minister for his outreach and his efforts, given that moving to a new city can be overwhelming, especially when you're moving from a new country. And given that, according to Stats Canada, hate crimes were on the rise from 2019 into 2020. And given that racism can happen in the workplace, to the same minister, can you tell us, tell this House about some of the initiatives that our government is undertaking to make sure that every Albertan feels safe and valued in this workplace? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Associate Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. Under the Fairness for Newcomers Action Plan, we have created a Fairness for Newcomers Office to work with regulatory organizations to ensure that their processes are up-to-date, fair, and procedurally correct. Mr. Speaker, one of the best ways to reduce challenges in the workplaces for newcomers is through the credential recognition. We have also created the Alberta Mentorship Program. We held the first ever Premier Summit for newcomers. Mr. Speaker, we are also bringing forth the Newcomers Recognition Award.
Good job. The Honourable the member for Calgary-Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the minister for his efforts. Given that wiping out racism and hate is an ongoing challenge, and given that all the initiatives this government has taken and the broader community has taken to make Alberta hate-free through various grants and other programs to reduce barriers for minority communities, to the same minister, what is the government's benchmarks to ensure that we are achieving our goals in this area to create an inclusive and welcoming community?
The Honourable Associate Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. We continue to have discussions with Alberta's Anti-Racism Advisory Council and are nearing completion on more than half of their 48 recommendations. We have been working across multiple ministries on an action plan to reduce systemic racism and to collect feedback to implement more inclusive programs. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that our government has done unprecedented work for our newcomers and racialized communities so that they can thrive, feel safe, and reach their full potential in this beautiful province of Alberta.
The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Yesterday, I raised concerns about the devastating flooding at the Denetah First Nations in northern Alberta. 1,100 members of the nation have been evacuated from Châté and have been housed in hotels wherever possible. Unfortunately, housing is not consistently available, and the road to camping sites such as Rainbow Lake have been cut off by the floods. Last year, flooding forced the nation to replace 72 furnaces and hot water heaters, an expense the nation cannot continue to support. A protective berm is needed in the community of Châté. What is the government's plan to get this berm built as soon as possible?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation is rising.
Thank you to the honourable member for that question. It's a very important question, and I'd like to start off by saying that we know it's a difficult time for many residents in northwestern Alberta, and our first priority is to ensure the safety and security of everyone. I do want all Albertans to know that my department is on the ground working around the clock to undertake significant repairs. And I've also had a conversation with the Denetah First Nation Chief James Anase, and I will be visiting in the coming weeks to have a in-depth conversation about how to enhance critical infrastructure.
The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Given that, on Tuesday I spoke with Chief Anase, who expressed concern that evacuation out of the community is severely hampered by the poorly maintained roads and the dangerously steep approach to the community from Highway 58. Given that this road is so steep that in wintertime, ambulances have refused to go down the hill and are forced to wait for patients to be brought up to them. Will the Minister of Transportation provide the people of Châté with the necessary resources needed to repair this road into the town site?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we are taking a cross-ministry approach on this, and I have been in touch with the Mayor of High Level as well because they are also impacted. And again, I will be visiting with the Chief in the coming weeks to make sure that we're having a detailed discussion on the infrastructure that we need to invest in to make sure that they are safe and secure.
Good answer.
The honourable member.
Given that my conversation with Chief Anase, he expressed concern that clear-cutting upstream has seriously affected the environment and landscape, which has resulted in the nation experiencing 100-year floods 3 times in the last few years. And given that to prevent natural disasters from doing the damage that we are seeing in Châté now, more needs to be done on climate mitigation and protection. Will the Environment Minister tell the people of Châté what specifically he will do to mitigate and prevent the community of Châté from experiencing flooding of this nature in the future?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Alberta government and our largest industries and Albertans all across this province, Mr. Speaker, are investing unprecedented amounts in technology to be able to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we can meet our environmental obligations to be able to combat climate change, Mr. Speaker. That's a sharp contrast from that member and the official opposition who've dedicated most of their time in government to attacking our largest industry, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, as the Court of Appeal just said the other day, working to help Justin Trudeau steal the birthright of all Albertans, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate to see that.
Order. Order. The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford had his opportunity to ask a question. Order. Of course, the Speaker would never judge the quality of a question or an answer, so we all know how that would end. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, you see it right there. The NDP get mad when we attack their boss, Justin Trudeau, Mr. Speaker. But this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we work for Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud. A point of order is noted.
This week, Albertans learned the UCP will fail to meet its promise to reduce childcare fees by 50% for families in Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge. Well, the UCP also promised to create 10,000 new childcare spaces this year. Thousands of families are on wait lists right now. If the UCP stands a chance of creating this many new spaces, all UCP ministers, not just Children's Services, need to be working on this. So let's see if any of them are. To the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, the UCP's plan for downtown Calgary includes nothing about creating new childcare spaces. Why not?
Good question.
The Honourable, the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our Made in Alberta Childcare Plan will provide $3.8 billion for childcare in Alberta over the next 5 years to support improved access to affordable, quality and inclusive childcare. This new childcare agreement is great news for working families with children 0 to kindergarten age who are enrolled in licensed childcare. It's also great news for our province's economic recovery. Alberta was one of the first provinces to help reduce fees for parents, and families are seeing savings already.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Sounds like that minister's doing nothing, given that 40% of the new spaces that the UCP claimed to create last year never actually opened, and given that creating 10,000 new childcare spaces requires a well-developed strategy involving nonprofits, school boards, and importantly, municipalities, and given I've spent months actively speaking to municipalities across the province about creating childcare spaces, but they tell me they haven't heard from any UCP minister on this. So will the Minister of Municipal Affairs tell us when he plans to start taking this seriously?
Yeah.
Why isn't he talking to municipalities about new childcare spaces? Doesn't he care about the families in Calgary?
Oh, good question.
The honourable member, Red Tape Reduction.
Mr. Speaker, more than 90,000 children are benefiting from our agreement and are seeing reduced fees. Part of the approach is to complement Alberta's existing strong subsidy model that supported thousands of low and middle-income families across the province. This means that those families who are already receiving the highest subsidy were already on their way to paying much lower fees. CCPA report made their conclusions based on projections from a phone survey before the child care agreement in Alberta was rolled out. The report also did not take into account Alberta subsidies, an important part of how parents are saving on child care food.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Well, given I'd understand that, I'd be afraid to admit I'm doing nothing as well, like they all are. Given that creating new childcare spaces is meaningless if there are no early childhood educators to staff them, and given there's an extreme labour shortage in this workforce, but this government continues to attack the post-secondary institutions where they learn and upgrade their skills as educators, and given that failing to address this labour shortage has direct implications on our economy and the ability of families to go to work, can the Minister of Advanced Education tell this House if he's done any work at all with Alberta's post-secondary institutions to increase the number of spaces and access to early childhood education programs? And be specific, please. We'd like to grade your work.
Point of order is noted at 2:36. The Honourable the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always rich and entertaining to hear the members opposite talk about impacts to the economy. But anyways, families are paying between $10 to $25 a day, and most supports are being targeted to the parents who need it most. Parents are seeing on average 50% reduction in their fees, but that will vary depending on the fees charged by the program. However,
The Honourable Minister, the Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction, is very close to me, but it's even difficult to hear her from this range. I hope that I'll be able to do that with some reduction in the noise.
Mr. Speaker, no family will pay more than that they did before that. I know it's painful and difficult for the members opposite to hear about the outstanding work the Minister of Children's Services is doing in childcare and the positive impacts that's having for our economy, but they just have to face it.
Member for Laxane and Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to COVID-19, Canada has one of the highest vaccinated populations in the world. However, according to manufacturers of the COVID-19 vaccines, efficacy is greatly diminished for the current variants. As such, it behooves most rational-minded people to reconcile the federal mandatory vaccine policies that not only limit freedom of movement, but freedom of employment to its own citizens. In fact, a freedom convoy that had millions of supporters not only in this country, but internationally are asking the same question. Why do we need this mandated? Because it's simply out of touch with current realities. The response of the concerned citizens? Evoke the Emergency Act, something that typically is only reserved for war, or unless you're fans of the bromance down east. To the Minister of Health Justice, what is being done by provincial government?
The Honourable the Minister of Health is rising.
Mr. Speaker, thanks for the question to the Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, this government will always call out federal government overreach. An example of that overreach is the use of the Emergencies Act. It was unnecessary and disproportionate. Vaccine mandates and other public health measures also must be proportionate to the risk at that time. And, Mr. Speaker, at this time, the federal vaccine mandates for travel are disproportionate and pointless. Mr. Speaker, we'll keep advocating for the federal government to align their public health measures with the evidence and with the policies in place here in Alberta and in other provinces.
The Honourable Member for Laxane and Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister. Given the concerns of Canadians, regardless of vaccine status, was over the infringements of rights and freedoms as per our Constitution, and given the people had enough of this virtue signaling regarding the COVID policy, given the federal government as their desired effect of scaring the citizens into conformity, and the federal government has shown its track record of begging for forgiveness after they've done these type of acts, rather than seeking parliamentary approval. To the Minister of Justice, what are you and your fellow ministers doing to pressure the federal government to cease these infringements on Canadians' rights and freedoms.
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes up to standing up for Albertans' rights, Mr. Speaker, and their constitutional freedoms, no government across Canada is doing more than this one. And Mr. Speaker, we want to know, when will the NDP join us in our fight against the No More Pipelines bill, Mr. Speaker? The Alberta Court of Appeal ruled it's unconstitutional. We've stood up for Albertans' rights time and time again. When will the failed NDP join us in standing up for the constitutional rights of Albertans?
The order, the Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister. Given that the travel restrictions not only within our country but across the U.S. border and internationally have a negative impact on the economy, and given that numerous countries have already done away with the restrictions, what is being done by the Government of Alberta to have the removal of the restrictions and its citizens travelling for work or leisure in and out of this province who just happen to not be vaccinated from the first vaccination that went around for COVID?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health of Canada have been clear. Public health measures must be based on the risk at a given time, and they must be adjusted as the risk changes. Federal travel restrictions are hurting our economy with no proportional public health benefit at this time. We welcome the changes that the federal government made in April. They're a start, but Mr. Speaker, they are not enough. Federal vaccination mandates are out of step with the evidence at this time, and they need to end.
Members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period in 30 seconds or less. We will continue to the remainder of the daily routine. Has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to rise today and speak to the topic of women's health in recognition of Women's Health Week. I want to first acknowledge the Women's Health Coalition, who has advocated tirelessly on this subject and kindly joined us in the chamber for question period yesterday. Mr. Speaker, women's health is crucial, and yet there is a serious lack of understanding regarding women's health. There is a shortage of training and knowledge about the challenges that face women, particularly women's reproductive and general gynecological health. Unfortunately, when it comes to reproductive health, 10% of cases concerning men are listed as urgent, yet only 1% concerning women are treated with the same urgency. Traditionally in medicine, the health of women during their childbearing years or when they were bearing children was seen as the most important. While the wonder of conception and childbirth are amazing things, I can tell you that there is far more to a woman's reproductive health than just those years. Mr. Speaker, we must bring women's health into the spotlight. It is time to take action and work to get more health practitioners trained in gynecology. It's time to acknowledge that there are women who experience heavy menstrual cycles every month. It's time to raise awareness that this can be a sign of health complications and make sure doctors are trained to recognize this and provide treatment. It is time to acknowledge that women face challenges like fibroids, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and so many more. Here in Alberta, across the world, there is more time to bring awareness to women's health and its importance. I'm proud to say that Alberta's government is up to the challenge. We are committed to making sure that women have access to quality health care in a timely fashion across the province. This week and all weeks, I encourage continued conversation around challenges faced by women in their pursuit of quality health care. Only in hearing the stories and understanding the challenges can we arrive at the solutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cypress, Medicine Hat, has a statement.
Hey there. Have you ever wondered why megacorporations have access to the highest political offices in the province, but you can't even get a response to an email? The answer to this quandary is simple. Hire a lobbyist. We all know lobbying is the most simple and proven way to get your way, and thankfully, Alberta has some of the most toothless lobbying regulations in Canada. In Alberta, we don't even prevent immediate family members from lobbying each other. But wait, you say, isn't that a little shady? To that we say, don't you want a sole source contract? If you're looking to hire lobbyists in Alberta, start with one of the Premier's pet firms. You can even hire the Premier's most recent campaign team. Something is technically legal in Alberta. And you know what we say? Technically legal is the best kind of legal. So if you're an Albertan who can't pay your utilities, or you're struggling with rising insurance costs, or you stand in line with the rest of the schlubs, or you can do what the rich and the powerful do, hire a lobbyist today. But wait, there's more. For limited time only, when you hire one lobbyist, 3 more work for free on the Premier's leadership review. And you may already know the official opposition has been out fundraised in the government of Alberta for years. The Premier is getting desperate. As such, you can rest assured there's no job too big or too small for our crack team of party insiders. Using one of our patented political greasing technology, we can unstick rusty hinges and pry our way into virtually any legislature door. And don't worry about Alberta's pesky financial contribution limits. Our Premier and his cronies have rewrote the rules to ensure there are plenty of loopholes to exploit. If money in politics is like water on pavement, Bill 81 opens all the floodgates. Call now, and we'll even throw in a free Best Summer Ever hat and an Open for Good t-shirt. Lord knows there's no shortage of defunct swag lying around the Premier's office. Operators are standing by.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
The honourable member for Calgary Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills and Private Members' Public Bills, I am pleased to present the committee's final report on Bill 207, Traffic Safety Tow Truck Warning Lamps Amendment Act 2022. Sponsored by the Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont, this bill was referred to the committee on April 28, 2022. Mr. Speaker, the report recommends that Bill 207 proceed. I request concurrence of the Assembly in the final report on Bill 207. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the Speaker has the call. And the honourable member for Calgary Klein has moved concurrence in the report for Bill 207, Traffic Safety Tow Truck Warning Lamps Amendment Act 2022. This is a debatable motion pursuant to Standing Order 18.1b. Are there any members wishing to speak to concurrence? Seeing none, the Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills and Private Members' Public Bills has requested concurrence in the report on Bill 207, Traffic Safety Tow Truck Warning Lamps Amendment Act 2022. Does the Assembly agree to the motion? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Presenting petitions, notices of motions, introduction of bills.
Oh, my apologies, I missed you there. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs has notice of motions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move on behalf of the government motion 27, which reads as followed.
That motion has already been moved. When we call government motion 27 for debate, it can be done at that time. That's fine.
Thank you.
Tablings, returns, and reports. The clerk called the honourable member for Edmonton, Glenora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have the requisite number of copies of an article that ran today in the Calgary Herald, highlighting the cruel cut made to the Alberta School Councils Association by the current government and stating that an NDP government will reinstate their $650 annual in funding.
The honourable member for Calgary, Boular McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been 58 shootings in Calgary this year, and people are concerned about the proliferation of guns and gun violence. So I'm tabling requisite number of copies of an article titled, "This is a Tragedy for Our Community. Mother of 5 dead after road rage shootout in Forest Lawn."
Honourable member for Edmonton, McClung, I saw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with the 5 requisite copies of a report that shows the health and climate impact from coal power cost Alberta millions. The health and environmental groups urge Alberta to improve a phase out of coal. I mentioned this in reference to the laughter that would emanated from the other side by government members after I said that coal phase out was saving lives, when in fact this report clearly shows that it does, and that each year 700 emergency visits, 4,000 asthma episodes, and nearly 100 premature deaths are precluded by this move.
Are there other tablings? The honourable member for Lexington and Parkland.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have 2 tablings here. Again, folks from having difficulties with vaccine injuries. One lady unable to find work, the other one's unable to travel in the country, what the other opposition was heckling and laughing at today in a statement.
Are there others?
divisions.
Honourable members, we are at points of order, and at approximately 2:34, the Deputy Government House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be quick. At the time you just mentioned, the member from Edmonton-Rutherford, while the Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks was answering your question, said you took money from Indigenous communities. Making such a claim about a specific member of this chamber is unparliamentary. I rise on 23HI and J. Would ask that that member please apologize and withdraw.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At that time, certainly the Minister of Environment and Parks had made the imputed false and unavowed motives by suggesting that the anger from the official opposition was to do with support for the Prime Minister, when in fact very concerned because under the UCP government, $50 million that had previously been allocated for climate change adaptation to Indigenous communities is no longer there. Making the statement that the UCP took money from Indigenous communities correct. Unfortunately, the member, in the heat of the moment, used the phrase you. He was talking about the government, and certainly the entire dialogue back and forth was focused on the UCP government's actions, which have resulted in Indigenous communities having less money for climate adaptation. Given he misspoke, though, and said you rather than the UCP, I certainly withdraw on his behalf, although he's also in the room. So, Mr. Speaker.
Because he will apologize.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If you would have said you, I apologize and withdraw the word you and replace it with your government.
I consider this matter dealt with and concluded. At approximately 2:36, the Government House Leader rose on a point of order.
Withdraw.
I consider that matter dealt with and concluded as it has been withdrawn. Honourable members, orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government motions. Motion number 27, Honourable Mr. Nixon.
Now, the Minister of Municipal Affairs for Government Motion 27.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I rise to move on behalf of the government Motion 27, which reads as follows. Be it resolved that 1, a select special ombudsman and public interest commissioner search committee of the Legislative Assembly be appointed, consisting of the following members, namely Nixon, Chair, Rosen, Deputy Chair, Ahir, Armstrong Hominick, Billis, Goring, Sabir, Singh, Williams, for the purpose of inviting applications for the positions of Ombudsman and Public Interest Commissioner, and to recommend to the Assembly the applicant it considers most suitable to each position. 2, reasonable disbursements by the committee for advertising, staff, assistance, equipment and supplies, rent, travel and other expenditures necessary for the effective conduct of its responsibilities shall be paid, subject to the approval of the chair. 3, in carrying out its responsibilities, the committee may, with the concurrence of the head of the department, utilize the services of members of the public service employed in that department and of the staff employed by the Assembly. 4, the committee may, without leave of the Assembly, sit during a period when the Assembly is adjourned or prorogued. 5, when its work has been completed, the committee shall report to the Assembly if it is sitting during a period when the Assembly is adjourned or prorogued. The committee may release its report by depositing a copy with the clerk and forwarding a copy to each member of the Assembly.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs, on behalf of the Honourable Government House Leader, has moved Government Motion number 27. This is a debatable motion. Anyone wishing to speak to the motion? To the Honourable Minister to close debate.
Closed.
The Honourable Member, or the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs, on behalf of the Honourable Government House Leader, has moved Government Motion 27. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. So moved. So carried. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a great week of work this week. I'm grateful for everyone's participation, but at this time I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, May 24th, 2022.
Those members in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? So carried. Pursuant to Standing Order 3-6, the Assembly now stands adjourned until Tuesday, May 24th at 10 a.m.
I've got a few shopping days every Friday.
Yeah. Sure.
I've been saving.